Hey everybody, Babe Batts with the Freedom Outboard. Today we're going to update this Freedom 40 with some components that we're switching to. We're going to start with step one, removing all our hoses on the assembly. Then we're going to move to our tank removal. After that, we'll remove our fins. And then we're going to work on the lower unit and the bolts holding that up. Let's get busy. Now that we've got these hoses cut, we're going to pull them out of the cowling so we can move on to the next step of removing the fittings from the fins and the pump. Make sure you cut off the protective sheathing and save that for our reassembly. Make sure you cut this smaller line here coming from the chiller and set that aside for now. We'll be needing that later. Now we're going to remove the tank, get that out of our way so we have more room to work. Just the two to remove that. Set that to the side for now. Next, we're going to remove the 4 fittings and the fins on either side. Much easier to do this when it's on the motor, so I recommend you leave the fins on to do it. And then just dispose of these. We won't need them with the updated kit. Good. Next, we're going to remove this 90-degree and this adapter from this fitting coming out of the bottom of our midsection. We're going to start by cutting right here to remove this piece so we can spin the 90 out. When removing, make sure you grab onto this piece, this fitting here, with either a crescent wrench or be at the right size. And then just spin it out. Throw that to the side, we don't need that anymore either. Next, we're going to pull the 45-degree fittings out of the pump. Once we get both of these out, we can discard these as well. Next, we're going to remove the midsection cover. That involves 4 Phillips head and 1 10mm bolt. Now we're going to take the midsection cover off, being careful to snake it around both of these fittings and then the oil drain plug. There we go. Set that to the side for now. Now we're going to work on removing these 2 fittings and the idle plate as well. We're going to start by spinning this one out, and then we have to remove this part of the fitting here to clear the drain plug and remove this one after that. I prefer to cut it out, but you can also back out the fitting if you take the hose off. There we go. Next, we're going to remove our idle exhaust plate here so we can scrape the gasket and replace it. Be sure to loosen these in torque sequence as labeled, starting at 8, going down to 1.
Why is it important to do them in sequence?
That way we don't warp the plate. And trying to make sure we get the gasket on and off evenly. Now that we've got the bolts out, we can remove it by either tapping it or prying it. So there's the front cover. Then there's a midsection plate here we have to remove on the idle circuit too. And there we go. Now we're going to scrape both these gaskets and replace them. We're going to take our straight razor and scrape these paper gaskets off as we're going to replace them to help with leaking. Now that we've got these 2 parts cleaned up, we're going to set them aside and move to scraping the gasket off the motor side. And some more of the same here. Take your box scraper and scrape the seal surface clean. All right, now that we've got our seal surface here clean, we're going to move on to our fin removal. This will involve at least a 17 mil on the top, and depending on the year of the motor, you might need to back it as well with a spanner wrench, open end box end wrench. Now that you've got the fins removed, you can set them aside until reassembly. Now we're removing the opposite side fin. Same thing, once it's removed, just set it aside until reassembly. Next, we're gonna replace these lower unit bolts. That's gonna involve removing the front bolt here, holding it into the lower unit, as well as 2 in the back holding the bumper. And then depending on your model, there will be 4 here for the tie plate and 2 here for a tie plate that are 13mm head bolts. Just need to loosen this one enough to clear. That should suffice. And then we gotta move to these rear 2 here. Just like that, our bumper's off. Set that to the side. And we're gonna work on removing our fin brackets next. All right, next we're gonna remove the 4 bolts holding the fin brackets in the lower unit. Be sure to leave the 5th one on the front here in the lower unit so it doesn't fall out when we're servicing this. We're gonna do that by accessing this hole here into these bolts. Once again, depending on the age of your motor, you may have a safety wire tie between the bolts. Make sure to cut that out, remove it before you start loosening. Just run these 4 bolts out. And with the bolts out, we can remove these brackets and set them aside for pre-assembly and reassembly. Before reassembly, we've got to open up a couple of holes to 1.5-inch hole saw. We're going to start with the 2 in the lower section of the motor tray here. And then once we get those drilled out, we're going to open up the 2 in the midsection cover in the front here. And if the lip seals are in here, remove them and save them to reinstall after you drill the holes and install the cover. All right, now that we've got everything ready for reassembly, we're gonna start by putting these fin brackets back on, which involves our new stainless hardware here and some red Loctite. When putting the fins on, make sure that these spacer blocks are in the front of the lower unit. Don't be shy with the red Loctite. It's not gonna hurt it. I start with the rear one, insert it in the bracket, and snake the bracket into its location. And you should be able to start these by hand. Just get some threads biting. That side started. Now we'll put the other side on, ensuring the spacer block is installed. We can now sneak a socket in here and run this bolt in much quicker. And just snug these, we're gonna come back and final torque them in a moment. Now we're gonna final torque the 4 bolts that we just put in holding these tie plates in the lower unit. I like to sneak through with the 1/4-inch drive 14mm like before. However, if your lower unit doesn't have clearance holes, you have to get a wrench with a torque adapter to do it. The torque spec for that is 40 foot-pounds. So let's get them torqued up. I like to just torque these side to side. If you want, you can go in a cross pattern as well. It's personal preference. All right, now that we've got the plates torqued in, we're gonna install our bumper, which includes the 8mm on the front and then the 10mm we took off earlier. Once you get them lined up, they're pretty quick. Once again, there's no torque spec on these. Just snug them up. Don't over tighten them. Once again, don't over tighten. Just snug it up so the bumper's not rattling on the keel. And then from there, once again, depending on the age of your motor, you'll install the front and rear tie plates and snug those as well. There's no torque spec for those either, so just tighten them up good. All right, now we're gonna reinstall the fins using the 17mm bolts we removed. I like to begin by just putting a couple through the bracket and hanging it. Hang it there, and that way you can start your nuts and have both hands free. All right, now that we've got both of the cooling fins on, we're gonna move up to our idle exhaust area. First thing we're gonna do is check to make sure there's no chips in any of these ports. from all the drilling that we've done. Gotta go grab my torque wrench. All right, now we're gonna install our idle exhaust plate and cover, and make sure that you Loctite the bolts. We're using a blue Loctite or any kind of medium strength thread locker. And as we're tightening this, we'll go in the torque sequence as it's labeled, 1, 2, 3, 4, so on. Once we have all these bolts started, we're going to run them down with our torque wrench to 65 Newton meters. And the main reason we took this apart is to check for the chips in here and then updating the gaskets. All right, now that we've got the idle gaskets and plate reinstalled and torqued down, we're going to move to installing some of the fittings that we're replacing, including the 4 on the fins, the 2 on the side of the midsection here, and then the 2 that go to the pump. Yeah, we're applying a thread sealant. This is Loctite 55667. You can use pipe dope, a gas oil, something of that sort. Something that's just made for thread sealant for pipe threads. We're just gonna start winding these in. And once again, these are tapered threads, so they don't need to bottom out. So what I like to do is get them as tight as I can by hand. And then, for example, this one needs to be at about a 45 to the motor. So I'll take a wrench to it and run it in until we're snug and at the right position. That should be about right there. The fin on this side gets 2 45-degree fittings. Same thing, run them in by hand as tight as you can. And then from there, we'll take the wrench to them. These need to face backwards at a slight angle. So I should be able to get a turn and a half out of these. And this may need to be adjusted as you install the hoses, you'll find, but somewhere in that realm should be a good start for us. Same thing with the front one in that hole with this fin. And then the other side, we're going to do the same thing with some 90-degree fittings. Same thing, tighten by hand and then turn the rest of the way with a wrench. And these fittings, once again, are going to want to face backwards a little bit at a little bit of an angle. So let's get our turn here with the wrench. And then orient them backwards slightly, just like that. That should work for us. Same thing again with the front. Just like that, our fins are ready for the hoses. All right, next we're going to install the 2 on the side of the midsection. Once again, these are pipe threads, so we'll just snug them up with a socket. I recommend that, once again, you start it, tighten it as far as you can by hand, and then we'll say another turn and a half should be good, just until it starts to get tough to turn by hand. Turn with the wrench rather. Like that, this side of the midsection is ready for hoses. Our last set of fittings we're going to put in right this moment are the 2 in the pump. The pump also gets a set of these 45-degree fittings. Once again, sealant, snug them up by hand. And then we want to stop so that they're oriented pointing this way away from the motor. Trying to match them. Somewhere in that direction, also pointing down and away from the motor. And now the pump is ready for the hoses. All right, now that we've got all the fittings in, we're gonna reinstall the midsection covers so we can continue with assembly. Just make sure that you get it around the oil pan, or the oil plug rather, sliding in it evenly on both sides, and then ensure that it's behind the handle here, the grab handle here, making sure that it slides behind this here, there's this handle area. And then clipping it in up top here, making sure it slides in all the way. And then from there we just install the hardware. Snug that up. The spec is 65 inch-pounds for that. Then we just run these in snug. Remember, they're only going into plastic, so they don't need a whole lot of torque on them. They're just holding it. Now we're going to install the 3 in the rear. Make sure that we're going through both pieces of the plastic and the hole in the casting here. The screw is only screwing into the plastic threads, so don't over tighten these. Just like that, the midsection cover's back on. Now we're ready to start running some hoses and install our tank. So now we're gonna pre-assemble our tank, which involves installing two hoses. As you see here, we've got slightly different lengths. The shorter of the two goes to the outermost fitting right here. To assemble these, we're going to start by using a little bit of lubrication. I'm using engine oil. You can use an assembly lube, something of the sort, just to lube the taper and the threads. The point of doing this is so we can install and reinstall these multiple times, otherwise the anodizing will get beat up. So we're just going to put these on, snug them up by hand, and then I highly recommend you torque these. We like to use a crow's foot, and the torque spec is 40 foot-pounds. So we'll just go until we hear our click. There's one, there's two. Now our tank's ready to assemble on the motor. You're gonna slide it up in here and ensure that our holes are lined up, and then take the bolts that we took out earlier and reinstall them. We don't want this to rattle loose, so a little air ring on the side of too much torque is okay with these. Now we're nice and secure. Now we're ready to do our final assembly, which involves installing all our hoses. We're gonna start by putting the two that return from the fins to the tank on. Once again, we're using a little bit of engine oil for assembly lube here. We'll just do the same thing. We'll get these started and snug by hand. There's one side. Here's our other side. And in final assembly, we may have to adjust this fitting some more just to get the kink out of the line, if you will. Next, we're going to install the two coming from the midsection down to the fins. As you can see, they're slightly different lengths. The longer of the two is going to go from the bottom fitting on the side here, and we're going to run that over to the far fin fitting in the front. And this one we want to make sure is behind this line, but in front of this, so right in the middle here. And then the shorter of the two goes on the near side and the top fitting. So top fitting here, and the near side fin. Next, we're going to install our lines to and from the pump. The longer of the two is going to go from the outlet of the pump here to the inlet of the motor, which is coming out of the midsection here. Once again, using a little bit of engine oil for lube. And this one here, we're going to snake through our midsection. Just like that. And route it between the two hoses we just installed, like this. And down to our fitting. When we install this one, we want to try and keep it tight to the timing belt, but not touching. That way it'll clear the cover, the cowl. And we can adjust this in final torque as well. Now we're going to install the intake to the pump from the tank. Once again, using a little bit of engine oil for assembly lube here. This one also has to be snaked through the midsection, or the cowl, like such. And then we're going to put it on the tank first. And after that, we'll install it on the fitting on the pump. Same thing on this side. Keep it as tight as you can to the engine so it'll clear the cowling of the cover. Now we're going to install our chiller line here onto the back of the tank. First, by ensuring that we have our hose clamp on here. And then we're going to take a little bit of engine oil and put it on this barb fitting just to help ease it on. And one last little trick is just a little bit of heat helps this to slide on easier. Just like that. Tighten the hose clamp and we're good. And I should mention that if you cut this chiller line right close to the barb on the old tank, you should be able to reuse it. If not, you can also replace it. Now the final step before bleeding and running the motor is to torque all the AN fittings, the ends of these hoses, down to 40 foot-pounds. And once again, with this top one, making sure we're keeping it tight to the block, but not touching the timing belt. Boom. And then we'll repeat the same process on the other side. Yeah, now we're taking the pump inlet and tightening that onto the tank. There we go. Now we're ready to put our coolant in and bleed it. All right, now we're ready to bleed the coolant system. We're gonna start by dumping 1 gallon in the tank. This is a 50-50 mix. All right, we've got our first gallon in. From here, we're gonna start the motor, let it circulate, and we're gonna have to add more as we go. As we can see, the coil level's dropping to our sight glass here. Now we're gonna add it again until we can see it in the middle sight glass. Level dropped again, so now we'll fill it till it's in the center of the sight glass and we should be good. There we go. Now we just let it sit and check for leaks and we should be all set. All right, once we get our hoses run through the cowling and onto our pump and our tank, we're going to install the protective sheathing that we took off and saved from earlier, ensuring that we slide them down into this portion where it goes through the aluminum. That'll help protect from abrasion. Okay. And another update that you may have to do depending on, once again, the age of your motor is we're going to move this line up above this breather hose, this harness rather, and we're going to zip tie it to the valve cover. So we'll remove these grommets that we have, and this is just going to help keep the harness from moving around and rubbing on something. Snug that down, trim it flush, and then we're going to repeat it on the other side as well. So pull the grommet off here, and we're going to take our zip tie, run it around this feature and around the harness, like such, and cinch it down. And that way, this harness is tied up under here nice and tight and not bouncing around. Just like that, our Freedom outboard is up to date with our new hoses and our hardware and gaskets. If you have any questions, reach out to us. You can find our number on the website at freedom-outboard.com.